To our 12-week novel writing course for WordCamp. This is the new Discord community that is sort of a branch off of ScriptCamp, which is our screenwriting-focused server. This one is going to take you from idea to completed draft of a novel in just 12 weeks, so until the end of the year. We're so glad to have you guys with us for this brand new course. What is WordCamp? This is a writing community that's focused on taking you from concept to idea to first draft and then more polished draft of a manuscript. The manuscript might be for short stories, novelettes, novellas, or something along those lines, but really this is focused on writing novels. So we have lots of free classes, events, and workshops, including this weekly 2-hour meeting that is going to be Saturdays from 12 to 2 from now until the end of the year. You can join at any point, but you'll get the most value out of it if you just follow along with the steps, and we'll sort of take you through how to write a novel 101. So we also have the things that are on our other server, ScriptCamp, which might be useful for you, and also are included in membership. Once you have, ScriptCamp membership, that's going to include WordCamp stuff as well. Anything with the camp suffix on it is going to be under that same sort of skill camp umbrella. So you can access all of the VIP member classes, boot camps, and writers labs on our ScriptCamp server too, if you're interested in screenwriting. So this is sort of our live interactive learning platform that is focused on these classes with live instructors, consistent schedules that are going to take you through these programs that are kind of like you're going to write and complete one finished thing in a several week span. We have new classes coming soon with your ScriptCamp membership. You can come by the servers on ScriptCamp or WordCamp and say hi. Here's a little about me. I'm mostly a screenwriter myself, writing novels since high school as well, and short stories and things like that, and have always had a great love for prose. Grew up reading and writing fantasy especially, and I moved to LA in 2015 to be a screenwriter. Have been assigned professional screenwriter since 2017 when I placed in the top 10 of the Tracking Board's Launchpad's Tracking Board feature contest, and since then have written on Creepshow for AMC. I've been on a few lists, as you can see here, and have had a script set up with a major production company in town in Los Angeles. I teach the boot camps for writing feature film, writing TV pilot, and the Saturday slot, which used to be things like genre classes like sci-fi, but now we're doing this sort of specialty in novels until the end of the year. So I also teach the lab, which is on Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m., and all these times are in Pacific time. You can come with one-on-one question, or like if you need more one-on-one help, specific questions or explanations of some principle that you heard talked about in class that week that you just want to hear more of. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Well, actually, let me get out of the way of this one so you can see it. That lab is going to be later today. It's from 4 to 6 again. So if you have more questions or topics that you want to hear more about, or up to 5 pages of work that you'd like feedback on or to get reviewed in some way, Writers Lab is a great time to do that. We also have Fantasy Workshop, which is run by Amanda, who's one of our script campers, and that is going to be on Sundays from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock Pacific time. And so I've done a couple guest spots on there, and we'll be doing one on the 25th if you have any interest in coming to that. Horror Workshop, many other great genre-focused groups on ScriptCamp. So if you're into those types of writing, then I recommend join ScriptCamp as well as WordCamp, and you can hop in or maybe start your own group. You can also start a group similarly on WordCamp if you want to start something more focused on, again, prose, novels, short stories, novellas, things of that nature. You can see all the other great stuff we have upcoming here on this list. So week 1 overview. Let's bring me up now. Here I am. Okay, so week 1 overview. So we're going to talk about, we have so much to cover today. We have a lot of slides and tons of topics, but we're going to go over the basics of what is a book and why are you writing one, and like different types of books you might want to write, different genres, different word counts, how to think in terms of word counts and words, and all these different distinctions between the different categories of what we are trying to in fact create. We'll look at target markets, including literary, upmarket, and commercial, adult, YA, middle grade, chapter book, and whatever sort of categories your book might be fitting into. We'll look at student goals and what it is that you are trying to accomplish, and what we'll have time for you to feel free to unmute your mic and speak to us about the things that you are, like what inspired you to do this, or what are you trying to create, anything like that. We will always have time in these classes to unmute yourself and to speak. And just, I would encourage you, especially in ScriptCamp, but on WordCamp too, but come to class ready to talk out loud and articulate. And if you can't use the mic for some reason, you can just type using our chat channel. But there's lots of chances to interact here. It's kind of one of the big benefits of a live interactive class is that you get to speak and ask questions and express yourself. It makes it, in my opinion, better than the normal form of online class, which is just watching a series of videos, though of course you are also just free to watch along with the videos if you want to do that. So we have genres, so we'll look at definition, expectations, and promises of these different genres, and there might be some things that surprise you. Some genres might have more strict rules than you are really thinking of, or some might, in fact, have less strict rules than you're considering. So we'll definitely want to look at what is going to make each of these genres tick, and make sure that you know what your genre is, because if you don't know what genre your book is, you're going to be in trouble when it comes to things like querying, communicating, like the basics of the story to someone, or just getting someone to read it are going to be very challenging. We'll look at prose, though. I want to do much more on prose, and we won't have a chance to do more than a couple introductory kind of slides on this today to get you thinking in the terms of prose that we want to be using in the course. So we're going to follow up on this, and you don't have to memorize every single thing that we'll talk about in terms of prose today, but just definitely do understand that you don't have to have a degree in English writing to write books. You don't have to have even graduated high school. But these sort of English class essentials are sometimes really necessary in the academic study of this craft, and that I will be speaking in more sort of academic terms when it comes to, parts of a sentence, parts of speech. These things are really, really going to matter for novel writing and in your own work, so you should endeavor to learn as much about these things as you can and try to get as comprehensive of an understanding of this craft as you can possibly get. What else? We'll look at Sketchbook a little bit today and talk about how you can already start this sketchbook and start to add things to it. A sketchbook, not in terms of like you're drawing pictures, but a sketchbook, I call them this in terms of, it's one document where you're keeping all your notes and all your ideas when it pertains to one specific project. And last, we'll have a reading assignment and a paragraph assignment for next time. So for next time, you can read one of 3 novelettes from a list of suggestions that I have. You can read something on your own, whatever you want, and we will have an assignment. You will be writing 1 paragraph to turn in next week, just to sort of get a general sense of the basics of your prose writing abilities. So that's sort of the essentials for today. We have a lot to get through, and sorry we had a little bit of a false start at the beginning, so I want to just kind of jump right into the rest. But during the class, you can use our chat channel on the left-hand side of your Discord window, or if you're watching along on YouTube or Twitter or something like that, you can leave comments, and we should be able to see them. Most of the time, we can see them in the class. So make sure to scroll down to where it says the classroom on Discord, and if you click that word bubble, you will find that chat channel. I'll be checking back there now and again in order to see if there have been any questions or comments in the meantime. Okay, so let's get going. Before anything else, let's make that sketchbook. So go to Google Docs. You're going to open a blank new Google document where you're going to keep and organize all your ideas, questions, and notes for the project as you develop it. So do that now. Like, even if you're not 100% sure if you want to do the course or not, I recommend just have it open and just be writing down things as they come to you, writing down the basics of whatever it is that you have already in terms of your idea. Maybe you have some sense of like what will happen in the book, or some characters you might want to see, or maybe, people come from writing books from many different angles, right? Some people have one book that they've wanted to write since they were a kid. Some people have one book that they have been, dreaming about for years. And some people are like, I don't know what I want to write. I just want to write something. So you got to kind of have a place to keep what you do have all together in one place. So let's try not to have a bunch of different documents, a bunch of different files and folders. You want to keep everything in one spot. And Google is nice because you can just link these documents very easily to share and collaborate with other people. So I recommend using Google Docs unless you absolutely can't for some reason like that. So go ahead and make that now. I would title it just Novel Sketchbook or Novel Notes, Novel Brainstorming, something along those lines. And I would have that open during the course so that you can be, adding to that, editing that, and writing stuff in there as we go. Bootcamp ground rules. So get used to the idea of sharing work with me and with fellow students. Even at these early stages, I know that this can be like a tricky step for some people just because sharing early work is difficult, and novelists especially are kind of known for being very, very, very artist types, I should say. Some artist types are very sensitive. We are very neurotic. I think we're famous for being neurotic and sensitive and all of this. So I know it can be challenging to hear these notes at the early stages, but I would just try to get used to this idea of a boot camp style class which requires the sharing of ideas all the time. It's okay to share an idea that requires a lot of work. It's okay to share an idea that somebody says, I don't get it. I don't think that works. Something like that. Like, although those things can be challenging, I would just get used to this idea of collaborating and hearing notes and getting feedback, because although this is much less of a collaborative writing style than screenwriting or TV writing, there is still collaboration that has to happen here, and you are still going to get notes from literary agent, and then from an editor, and those could take months. That can be just as much development as a script goes through, and you're going to have to, you have more control here than you would for a script, but you're still going to have to work with people, and you don't want to be that author that's like a huge pain to work with. If you're going to continue with the course, you should use a real name, or a nickname, middle name, something. If you really don't want to use your real name, you can right-click your username to change it, or ask us to change it for you. But you can keep a screen name on for today. But after this week, please use a real name for the course. If you don't have an idea yet, then try some crazy thing you've always wanted to see that you think nobody would ever write but you. I think that, especially if this is your first book or one of your first couple books, you can't count on it being very good, because the first things that we make in any type of craft or any type of art are not that good. So if this is something that you've dreamed of writing since you were a child, and if you don't get it just right, your family would be dishonored and shameful, and they will throw you out into the street, maybe not the best idea to write for a boot camp, which again is a very condensed period of time in which you're trying to write something relatively quickly to build those sort of muscle memories and skills that are going to be required to do this again and again and again, because very, very few people just write one book and have it be a huge success or a hit or get published or even be any good at all. So you're going to want to expect that you're going to be writing a bunch of books, because you have to get the bad ones out of the way before you can get to those good ones, so to speak. So I would just accustom yourself to this idea and try your best to detach from your ideas a little bit and say, I know that I'm going to write another one after this, and I'm going to keep improving. Go ahead, Nacho. Did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just going to mention, I've heard some novelists mention I'm just pulling it out of the air or whatever, but to write 1 million words.
Goodness. You mean in their life, or before they write a good book, or
get?
Go ahead.
Yeah, before you before you get to the place where you're skilled at writing novels or knocking out, So
I see.
1 million words. If you're doing, I don't know, is that 10 novels? I don't know.
That's more than 10. Depending on the length. Yeah, that's if you're writing long books, that's about 10 books. You can even look at stories from people who broke in, and they sometimes have written 12, 15 books. I think Brandon Sanderson wrote 12 books before he sold anything at all. So you got to expect that you're going to be doing a lot of this. And I don't know if 1 million words is the right number. Maybe it is, but this will take a while. This is a long road. Very few people are good at this at the start. No one's first painting that they ever do hangs in a museum for the most part. So just expect that this is a long process. Carmen says, I'm in a mini vacation going in and out of service, so I'm just listening using screenplay as an outline to start. Okay, sounds good. That's all right. No problem. Thanks for being with us, Carmen. So let's keep going, and let's talk about thinking in words. So we're going to dive in, and we're just going to start talking about the main concepts of novel writing. We're going to go in for a couple slides here just to get the basics in place. Then I'm going to ask, what are some of your favorites? And you're going to introduce yourselves, and we'll talk about our goals for the course. We want to go pretty quickly just because we have so much to do, but let's get these basic things out of the way first. All right, thinking in words. A lot of the time, we're thinking in page counts in screenwriting, and I guess since I started in novel writing when I was really young, then moved into screenwriting, and that's all I did for 10, 12 years. And then I'm kind of moving back into novel writing over the last 2 or 3 years. So I was thinking mostly in pages, page counts. That book would be 500 pages long. That script is 90 pages. I aim to write scripts 90 to 100 pages long. Things like that. But for books, a page is a really variable thing. A page can be any number of words depending on the layout and the font and all this stuff like that. So we have to start thinking in terms of word counts and not page counts. So a novel is a narrative piece of fiction usually defined as at least 50,000 words long. They're written to captivate and entertain an audience or reader with literary and poetic mechanisms of some kind. The difference between a book and a novel is that a book is just a handwritten or printed work of fiction or nonfiction, whereas a novel is a form of long prose that describes fictional events and characters. So novels can use elements of reality, but we understand novel means fiction. A nonfiction book is a totally different type of thing. And there are nonfiction books that resemble novels or sort of feel like novels, and there are also the other way around. There are novels that sort of feel almost like, nonfiction accounts of things. But there is a clear distinction there. Books can be, true or not. Novels are, by definition, fiction. So 50,000 words long, sort of minimum. And if we talk, let's just look at this before we do the introductions, but word counts look like this. So a short story is going to be about 1 to 10,000 words. Some people even say 7,500 is where it kind of maxes out for a short story. But novelette is going to be 10 to 20,000 words, and these are actually really nice. Most people never read these, but they're actually great to read. It's just like you could read it in 20 to 40 minutes long, and you get the whole story. It's like it feels a little like a movie, or a novella is similar. It feels a little like a movie. It's 20 to 40,000 words for a novella, something like The Mist by Stephen King, which is like, it feels like a horror movie basically when you're reading it. And we have novels, which are 40,000 to, I think they max out usually around 300,000, but there are examples of longer books than that. But in terms of getting published, 300,000 is like, that is pushing the limits of what a single volume can be. So different genres have different word counts attached to them. We can talk about those when we get to the genre section. There is this idea of series as well, which we never get to do in screenwriting, but you get to write as many sequels and things as you want. Unlimited number of potential sequels, maxing out usually around 10 books, but many series go longer than that. Some novel series, or I should say, not series of novels are much more common than series of novellas or series of novelettes, though all of those do exist, and like I really enjoy several series of fantasy novellas. So this is very much a thing. The shorter forms like novelette and novella are usually published online in ebook kind of form nowadays. You're not really going to be able to find as many of those traditionally published in print, but there are exceptions. And if you're breaking in, you're more likely going to be wanting to write a novel to begin with. You don't have to start writing short stories nowadays. The conventional wisdom used to be to write it, to become a novelist, you have to start with short stories in the same sense that a filmmaker would start with short films before they go up to making a feature. That can be true, and you can go that route, but you do not have to, and there's absolutely not a requirement to have short stories published in any kind of publication before going into novel writing. So do not feel the need to do so if you do not want to. All right, let's look at introductions, discussion. Tell us about yourself. What are some of your favorite books, favorite authors, favorite genres? What have you written before now? What are your goals as a writer? Let's maybe just go down our list and try to keep it to like, just a minute or two. Just, we can't let this take up most of the class, but in just a few sentences, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you're interested in, and tell us why you're here. Let's start with Alien Boy at the top of our list. Go ahead.
I basically just want to write because I just want to write because I have stories in my mind that I want to write down. In terms of books, I'm not, honestly not that much of a reader, but as a kid, I loved reading Captain Underpants.
I read those.
But I wasn't that much of a reader when I grew. I wasn't that much of a reader in my life, but I am reading comic books and whatnot. I guess I have written stuff before, mostly my own comic books, my own stories, and my goal as a writer is to I guess be a good storyteller in my own way.
Okay, great. So maybe still figuring out your exact goals, but just want to get better at writing and storytelling. That's a great set of expectations. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that. I will say, number one step, you said you weren't much of a reader, become much of a reader is going to be always, always, always number one. You must start reading. And I have some recommendations at the end of this course with links to things that you can read in like 20 to 40 minutes that you'll probably like if you're into those genres. So if you want to be a great writer, you must become a very prolific reader. Let's check in with Amanda.
So I'm looking to write a fantasy middle grade or young adult novel. And I just have ideas sort of swirling around. I don't know if they're different books or the same book. I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm putting everything into a sketchbook right now. And it's funny though, because I did have one idea that I started actually writing a few years ago, and I might pull some stuff from that, but I'm also open to just starting totally fresh. And debating on whether I want to write the story that I'm super passionate about, or do like a test novel. But I'm starting to learn that if I pick a story that I don't care about that much, I'm not going to write it. So I'm just not, that doesn't motivate me. So I think I will choose the book I want to write, but just realize it's going to be a very bad first draft.
Yeah. Or,
and that,
or just trust yourself to be able to come up with more stuff that you will like just as much next, right?
True. Right. Exactly. Yeah. That ideas, and that's exactly what's been happening, is ideas are just getting prepared for this class. All these ideas are coming, and there's all kinds of new premises, and then also there's nothing wrong with pulling stuff out from one book and putting it into the next book.
Yeah.
So, the 10 books before you get a good one, it could be, one of those. It's not like all that writing was for nothing. You may pull characters from the earlier books. You may pull parts of other books into the next book.
Right.
So
exactly.
it's not that you're not using anything from those books. But to get a good premise and a good, good character arc and all of that, I'm sure takes time. So so that's, I'm really excited to start. I've written a couple rhyming picture books, but that's all that I've published, and I write blog and sort of nonfiction. I'll add one last thing, is that I've had these ideas about that I wanted to express in nonfiction that I'm now realizing fiction is a much better venue, because I don't need to convince anybody of the argument. Like, it's just, I can just make it part of the world.
Yeah.
And yes, exactly. I don't, and it also takes a little of the emotion out of it. It's a more therapeutic, I think. So yeah, I'm really excited to start this. So
awesome.
Thanks
so much, Amanda. Looking forward to having you for all that. And Amanda runs Fantasy Group tomorrow, 5 o'clock Pacific, if you guys are interested in more fantasy stuff. Let's check with Carly. Looks like we have some comments in the chat. Carly, can you hear us okay? So I'm seeing Carly's mic is muted still, so I can come back to you in a minute. If you can figure out how to unmute, just try that gray microphone icon in the bottom left corner of Discord if you can't find that. We'll come back to you in a second. Carmen, let's check with Carmen. Oh, Carmen said she's in the car on that trip. That's right. No big deal. Carmen's been in many of our other script camp classes, though. Let's check with Gookie07.
Yep.
Hi. Do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us what your goals are, what you're working on, what you'd like to write.
Back in 2019, I wrote a memoir. It was a 5-page book, not a book, but like a short novella or something, which had a collection of maybe moments in my life, which was a journal, which I turned into a book. And then I thought I'll start writing volume 2 of it, but didn't get time. Then I worked on little short stories that I like thoughts that I used to write, and then I turned into small stories. That also I wrote back in 2019. Then I took a break, and then I started writing again. So hope things work out for me.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you for that. And you're looking to write more fiction for the course? Is that right, or are you still looking to do nonfiction?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Regardless of genre, I just want to write something.
I see.
But whatever, put people into to give people into some conversation and something out of it, and plots and all. Figure out something. Let's
awesome.
See how things go. So far so good. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. This is going to be a novel class, which is going to be fiction focused, but you can still maybe use some of these skills and principles for any kind of writing, whether that's essays or memoirs or personal articles or anything like that. Javon.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Javon, and I primarily write horror with a bit of fantasy, but not But for my first book, Nox and Narita, I decided to go, why not, go full on uh, fantasy and horror slash mystery with it. For a quick synopsis, it's basically just about uh, it's based off Norse mythology, 200 years after Ragnarok, and there's a whole bunch of things going on with humanity and them wanting to ascend as gods, have new gods and whatnot. But the old gods are pretty much passed passed on, pretty much, or obsolete. They're nowhere to be seen at all. So that's pretty much kind of like major themes and whatnot. In terms of fantasy and horror in general, I feel like they work in tangent because there's a lot of themes that could very much be explored, whether it's experimental or young adult or even full on adult type of novels. I draw it's like a I'm like a moth, and those type of genres I just like a bright light. I just flock towards it. like it
Same.
blindly flock towards it. Uh I guess when I want to when my goals as a writer, it's to simply write those stories with borrowing mythologies that are that will be timeless, ones that will last through the ages much longer than I would be able to live, possibly, perhaps. And ones that hopefully just stick around, and perhaps teach people some things and whatnot about life and choices. I think because those are real meat. Those are real stories that us writers are capable of.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Horror and fantasy, very much my specialty, so I think you're in the right course, I will say. JT.
Howdy. I am a screenwriter. Mostly I write with a partner, and so I want to come over to novel writing, do something on my own. So I've written one book that I queried. It was a comedy novel. There's not really a market for that, I found out. It's also, I'm proud of it, but there's also flaws. So for this class, I have a 75% done draft of a middle grade novel, like a middle grade fantasy about a foster kid who finds a magical old west town while on vacation with her foster family.
Okay.
And I reckon that could use another pass and look, and yeah, that's what I'm up to.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So I find I also came from screenwriting to more novel writing, and I'm loving the freedom that novel writing offers. You can just write stuff that would be unproducible, huge budget, scenes with giant space battles or giant armies or crazy monsters or just things that would be really difficult to do in movies. I find that's what I'm always most attracted to writing in books. So maybe you'll find some of the same opportunities that way. Marcus. Are you there, Marcus?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Hi, I hear you now. Go right ahead.
Nope. Yeah, hold on a second.
There's just a delay. I can hear you.
Oh, there's
fine.
a delay.
Yeah, it's no big deal.
Oh, boy.
You can either answer in the text or you can just speak and we'll get it in like a second, I guess. Or several seconds. Or maybe we can come back to you also if you want. Okay, we'll come back to you in just a second, Marcus. Or maybe if there's a big enough delay, you might just want to use the text chat, and I can just read from there. Let's check with Mercurial Hyper Sprites.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, I hear you. Go ahead.
Hi, good to meet you, Connor. Uh, I, I'm Merc. You could call me Merc on Discord, but I'm a big reader. Uh, love all sorts of books. I would say my favorite genre as of now would be very intense urban crime by authors who I think have both lived and put poetry to the experiences of a lot of the cities in the United States, right?
Mhm.
So I really loved Dennis Lane, George Pelecanos, Richard Price, and I really love all sorts of books. My screenwriting experience is literally a third draft of my first drama, and I do plan to write drama for screenwriting, has always been my dream. But I think novel writing also helps exercise those muscles, and also just the idea that I think one of the biggest things that has appealed to me, and one of the biggest ideas I've always wanted to commit to, is a semi-autobiographical film. And this is something I've kind of struggled with, right? I feel like every time, and I've written before, so like literally just like notebook, like going insane, right? But I've tried condensing a lot of like what I might put of my life into a structure, and every time I call it autobiographical, it becomes so hard to look at because it's like, I'm condensing my life, right?
Mhm.
But that's kind of what I want to do here, and that is maybe, you know, kind of commit, I'm still journaling, and maybe commit a lot of the ideas to a memoir, and then maybe that can help me make that screenplay of my dreams, right? I think it's very hard, but when it's done, I really do admire it. Some of my favorite films, Eight and a Half, Squid and the Whale, have been autobiographical in some nature. A very recent one that I enjoyed a lot was Funny Pages, was written by Owen Klein, who starred in Squid and the Whale. Fun fact.
Mm.
But literally, all I want to do is kind of like definitely get my bare bones on writing and kind of like mine on this idea of like a lot of the struggles and blockades that have been kind of coming up when I really think of autobiography.
Great. Thanks for that. I will say a recent good movie that I liked along those lines, Honey Boy by Shia LaBeouf, is an interesting sort of like kind of
Love it.
autobiography, kind of not sort of thing. So that's a neat area to
Yeah.
be in for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Does anyone that I've skipped so far do they have their mics working? So either Marcus or Carly.
I think I may have mine working. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Perfect. Okay, hello everyone. Yeah, my name's Marcus. I consider myself much more a novelist than a screenwriter. So I've been in the screenwriting boot camp, but that's been a learning curve. But I've actually been dabbling so I've been writing a novel. I started this novel that I'm writing in like NaNoWriMo some years ago, but it like sparked this journey of, figuring out I didn't know what I was doing, but I've been learning writing basically ever since. But I found that it's really nice combining like what you learn in screenwriting and what you learn with novel writing and, figuring out the two. So I've become very interested in adaptations. Like right now I'm rereading Hunger Games because my novel is a YA adventure, but it's a fantasy adventure.
Mm.
But like Suzanne Collins, I used to work at NYU, and Suzanne Collins, it turned out she has an MFA from NYU,
Oh, cool.
but she's a screenwriter who did the novels. So right now I'm very interested in writers who professionally have had professional success dabbling in both. And you have Suzanne Collins, you have Nick Hornby, you have
George R. R. Martin.
Gone Girl, Gillian Flynn. Yeah, George R. R. Martin. Yeah, so it's really nice. And I just did, I don't know if you guys have heard of masterclass.com,
Mm-hmm.
but Kid Jemison, she has, no, not her, Roxane Gay, she's got one. And she talks about it in hers about how, as a writer now, you can write everything, graphic novels, movies, TV, yada, yada, yada. So, and I'm just finding it, I've been trying to finish this novel. So I'm going to be working on this novel in this class. I've revised it a lot of times, but at a certain point I realized, my problem wasn't really with the prose, it was with story and story development and character development. And I find it's a much better or much more like on the nose, like accessible learning via screenwriting than novel writing a lot of times. If that is helpful for anyone or trying to bridge, I find screenwriting, TV writing is really great for learning about character, and then film writing is really great for plot and getting the whole story in and with the pacing and all that. Anywho,
Yeah, totally right. I will add that the skills that novelists struggle with a lot are sort of the things that screenwriters have to get really good at in order to write something that's any good at all. So learning screenwriting and transitioning to novels from there, I have seen a lot of people have good success with.
yeah, and I find, I struggled in the script camp, but what I learned, I've been applying to all my novel projects, like the sketchbook, basically doing a lot of the front loading.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized, oh, I'm solving all these problems that I have with the plot, basically. And, it's lipstick on a pig writing great prose for a plot that's horrible or bad character development. And, and I've been in a lot more novel writing workshops, and I've been workshopping this book I'm going to work on for a year or so. But in the workshop, I also see, oh, guys, you guys, let me, I find that I'm constantly recommending screenwriting references to my novel writing buddies or something because, the problem is usually story and plot. So,
right.
It's interesting merging those together. And I don't know, I really, like, I did some other workshops with poetry and also, and yeah, I don't know, you get strengths, I find, from each of the mediums of writing. And I don't know, they really work well together. Anywho, that was a long-winded way of saying I'm going to be working on a novel I've been working on for quite a while, but I do feel like the stuff I've learned in the script camp, I've been applying it actually this week to this novel, and I feel like, oh, I can finally rewrite this thing or take another shot at rewriting it. So that's what I'm going to be working on. It's a YA adventure fantasy about a boy having an out-of-body experience, and to get put back into his body, he has to fulfill a destiny. And so it goes along that plot line.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. My only comment would be, if you take nothing else from these courses, then the organization and the structure, I think a lot of people have found useful, regardless of whether or not you actually even finish the thing you're working on. Like, the principles of how to organize and approach something are what we really try to hammer down before anything else. So thank you, Marcus. Let's check with Miss Jackson. Miss Jackson.
Hi. Yes,
Hi.
it's Jay Jackson. Yes, I'm working through a program right now, which is actually helping me study one of my skills. And I'm currently in the process of working on a young adult fiction novel. But throughout the process, I've also written a faith-based screenplay. I know it's not a vast audience, but there is a need for viewership for faith-based movies. So, yeah, I have a couple of scripts that I've written through one of the writing programs in Georgia. I'm not sure where you're based out of, but I'm in Georgia.
Oh, we're in Los Angeles.
Okay, well. So, yes, you did say that. You said you moved there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm working on, and ever so often, I like to join in on workshops and seminars, just so I can take back to my own manuscripts, my drafts that I'm currently working on, or even the revisions for what I've already written. Because we can all learn from each other.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And you said you're working on YA, or you write YA books, which is something I do as well. I write both YA and adult. So we'll talk about those distinctions today and what sort of makes those things tick. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Let's check with Nacho. Do you want to weigh in and just maybe tell us some books that you like or some things you're interested in, even if you're not writing a book at the moment?
Sure. Yeah. I guess I read pretty much everything, like literary classics, fantasy, sci-fi. I think probably my favorite settings are kind of like post-apocalyptic stories. But yeah, I like contemporary novels, a lot of crime, mystery, psychological thrillers and stuff. I guess I've only written one novel, and I'm considering maybe rewriting that one this boot camp. It's it was something I wrote really quickly during NaNoWriMo, and it's like 80,000 words, and so you can imagine like in a month, like bam, 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 knocking it out. So it was yeah. So I guess I don't know. Mostly what I've written is screenplays. I've written about 15 feature scripts now, and yeah, there are definitely lots of things you can do in a novel that you cannot explore in a script, in a feature. So I guess for me, when I'm reading like what kinds of books that I like, there are great stories and storytellers. There are great sort of writers who can just keep you riveted just by the quality of their writing, right? And these are two different sort of things. There are some just really, really rare writers who manage to do both, right? So I guess maybe I gravitate more towards sort of literary genre novels that are, just where the prose is so delicious and it sort of like tickles your brain to read it. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, what I enjoy the most in terms of reading.
Cool. Thanks, Nacho. Maybe upmarket would be how you describe sort of like literary / genre stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the lines are kind of blurred. There are some literary novels that have a little bit of, a genre or something. And I mean, I don't know. It's not. I don't think we should say like, "Hey, literary authors cannot tell stories," right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
There are so many. There are lots of literary novels that are just someone trying to push the envelope in some way where the story isn't that interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still learning how to like navigate these different genres and stuff. But I think there is a way to write something that's pleasing to read and also a good story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nacho. A couple more check-ins too. Let's Paul.
Yeah, hey. I'm Paul, and I have been screenwriting for a few months now. I've started but not finished like 4 or 5 scripts. But I've been devoted to one lately, so I hope I'll keep that up. Favorite books. I mean, I don't really read books, unfortunately, all that much. I have been listening to audiobooks lately, though.
That counts.
Mostly the Dorothy Parker collection. It's on like Amazon, like Kindle or Audible. I mean, it's really good. I really like the I guess the flow, the way it's being read. I don't even think it's the way it's being read. It's the way it's written on the page and being translated into audio. But the way it's written, I really like, and I guess I want to kind of capture that, put it into my own work at some point, and that's mainly what I care about. I'm really aesthetic over everything, I guess.
Okay.
Which is I don't know, like I still want to learn all the I guess the basics in order to, I guess, make it so I can get away with doing those aesthetic things. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, yeah, I want to be the kind of writer that can get away with not having much there, but still that can get away with just sounding nice.
Okay, great. And I'll say audiobooks absolutely do count. They are as valid as any other kind of reading.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, they
so
totally
I've been
do count.
listening to a lot of those lately, and I was like, do those count as reading? But
they do, but you should also be reading book. Like, you should also be reading yourself. So there's no real way around that. Like, you can totally absorb a lot from the audiobook and still improve your own skills based on audiobooks that you hear, but it's just not exactly the same as reading. So I'd say probably do both. Maybe even I like this thing where you get the audiobook and the book, so then when you can be reading, and then you can be like, I'm going to take a break for a while and play Tetris, and while you're playing Tetris, you listen to the next chapter on audio, and therefore you're like skipping back and forth between them, and that really, some people might not like that, but I really enjoy doing that.
Yeah, I mean, listening to her writing really made me want to, like, buy her book, like, buy some of those things that she's written and read them for myself, because I guess it's easier to digest things when you're reading them, for me at least.
Right. Okay. So yeah, highly recommend doing both, but audio makes a great companion to reading physical books too. Thank you for the update, Paul. We got a couple more. Esther, Queen Esther. Are you there, Esther?
Oh, can you hear me?
I hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry. The reason why I put Queen, when I put Esther, they said it's already been used.
Oh.
So when
Okay.
I introduce myself, I always say Queen Esther because people always remember when I put the Queen on it. But anyway, hello everyone. About 5 years ago, I walked into a Barnes & Noble and I found a book where it says 101 stories you can write. And what they did, each page had a title and like 12 words. So you had to use those words within your story of the title. And of course, at the beginning it was hard, but as time went on, I couldn't get over how easy it got and I started liking it. When we had COVID, with the meetup, there's a lot of writing groups. So I got involved and I really got into it. But a year ago, I hooked up with a cousin who's 13 years younger than me. So by the time I was 18, he was 5. So we lost the last member of our family and there's a lot of issues that we want to write a biography. So I want to, learn techniques because nobody knows me. I'm nobody famous. So, we want to have people read we're trying to gear to mental illness. So, of course, we're going to have to find a ghostwriter, to be able to present the material in a presentable way, So anyway, I just thought I could learn some techniques with this class. Is that possible? Biography?
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Like biography is a little different than a novel just because a biography is nonfiction, whereas a novel is fiction. But some of these principles will still apply, and like things like studying prose, studying what makes a great page, what makes a great paragraph. All these things are just sort of general writing skills.
Right.
They should apply to anything.
But when you said we have to share, I'm not ready yet.
Okay.
So I'll have to write another story. And I like suspense, mysteries, thrillers, crime. So I want to, after I read Delia Owens, where the crawdads sing.
Oh, right.
I like that. So I was thinking maybe since I know this area so well, and it's the beach, I live in Clearwater, Florida. So, I have the beach. So I thought I could use that scene, boating, fishing, and, make up a story.
Sure, that can be a good idea, especially if you have some really important thing you want to write later that means a lot to you. Maybe write a couple things to practice before and just get your skills up and make sure that when you get to that really big important thing, you can do it the proper justice.
Yes.
That's what I recommend.
Okay. So that's what my goal is.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much. That's a great goal to have. Just get those practice things out of the way. Use what's around you. Use what you know. Use the skills that you have and the life experience that you have to inform the writing. People really like that specific connection and that sense of authenticity. So maybe just pick what you know already. Yeah, the beach could be a great setting for a mystery or crime story.
That's what I thought. I grew up, for 30 years I went to the beach, and after that I didn't want to look like 30 to look like 70, which when you grow up in this area, you see a lot of women, who are a lot older because of the sun. And
the sun.
I pulled out of it.
Right.
Yeah, I love the pool, the water, but the sun. So anyway, that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you.
So a lot of variety in everyone's goals and things they're working on, which was great to see. We have just, I think, 2 more or 3 more to go. Tangina. Can you hear us, Tangina?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, I can hear you too. Go right ahead.
I have no idea about novel writing, and for this reason I'm here. I'm writing my memoir, but I have lots of problem. Um, I have some question about novel writing, where to start and how to finish, what will be the middle thing, chapter by chapter writing. So if you share it it's really helpful for me. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so you mean you're working on some of those like basic mechanics of novel writing or book writing, such as like what does a chapter structure look like what makes a great foundation for a book, things like that, that are more about the craft. Does that sound right? Okay, maybe not. But yeah, hopefully, if that's what you're looking for, then yeah, we'll definitely be talking a lot about just the craft and mechanics of writing the books themselves. Although this is, again, geared more towards writing fiction, that's not really memoirs, biographies, or nonfiction, things like that. A lot of these skills still will carry over and still will apply. Thank you, Tangina. Valdos Wolf?
Yes, it's Valdos Wolf, and hello, my name is Matthew Jones, and I'm not really much of a writer. I mean, sometimes back in high school, what I'd like to do is write a bit of poetry to kind of boost my confidence and my writing skills, because I was diagnosed with autism, which means sometimes I lack the focus and overwhelmed by the amount of words that are thrown at me sometimes. So the reason why I've come to this group is because I want to write a novel on one of my fictional characters that I made during high school, because I believe I need to challenge myself, and it would make me happy knowing that I've achieved something. I don't read as much like some of the others. I read a bit more last year, you see. My genre I love is fiction or fantasy, such as the Game of Thrones or the Hunger Games series, and of course some of the Star Wars books. Really, what I want to kind of make is a fantasy novel of my own, really, where I'd like to kind of adapt the concept of the Sholon monks, and yeah, in this fictional world where there's a race of druids that can communicate with the animals you see, and also transform into them, like, you know, looking at the connection between mankind and nature. Because when I read, sometimes, I mean, I know I'm a slow reader, but I love the fact that I immerse myself into these worlds, because you feel such a huge relief, if you get what I mean, just being away from it all. Mm-hmm. And I guess really, sometimes, yeah, I know what I want to say, but then it always comes out of me. This is one of the reasons why I guess I do it, because sometimes when I've been trying to write like for a few years now, but sometimes I always find myself back to square one, because I guess one of the things that is always difficult for me is like what I write little manuscripts and sentences each day, but then it's knowing how to start and how to put it all together, basically.
Right.
And I guess that's why I want to look into this. I want to see how so many others have managed this, and whether someone like me can build that up.
I think so. I think it's going to come down to organization and discipline, and these are things that anyone can learn.
Yes. Also, the other thing, now I remember, sorry, is that the most difficult part possibly is communication, because I'm not someone who would. I'm all right socializing, but it's knowing how to be a different character within those books, you know.
Right.
And you need to know the kind of communication skills for them, which I lack.
That might be true. I think we have a lot of writers that are in a similar boat though, or have, you know, that we in our script camp server we have many people who self-identify as on the autism spectrum somewhere though. So you're in good company, and there's lots of members of the community that can definitely give you some tips for maybe those specific challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Looks like we have. Is it Petabyte?
Hi everyone, Petabyte, but not my real name. I'm actually Petula, and I wrote a Caribbean Gothic novel manuscript that I queried, and I was actually offered representation, but I turned it down for multiple reasons, including the fact that I had just discovered and fallen completely in love with screenwriting. But now that my screenwriting is moving forward, I want to write a novel version of my YA sci-fi script, because I feel like all the groundwork is already done, and the response to the script has been so encouraging that I think it would be cool to have that IP in the back.
Right. Yeah, that is the nicest thing about writing books compared to scripts, is that you actually own everything when it comes to books, and people have to ask your permission to change things, and your voice just matters a lot more. Whereas with screenwriting, it's like you are considered one of many different voices, and you're not the definitive one. You're not in charge. Whereas with a book, you are in charge. So if you actually want to own those characters, own that fictional world, then a book is definitely the groundwork that you want to have in place, so that you make sure you maintain as much control as possible.
Completely agree. And I just want to say thanks for doing this. This is my first time, so I think it's just really awesome that you're providing this.
Sure. Thank you so much for being here. We're glad to have you. I think, was that everybody? Was there anyone that I moved past that or was having mic trouble that wants to weigh in now? I had to mute someone just a second ago. Did they leave? Gar? I guess Gar left. Carly, are you able to speak or hear us? It's okay if not. We can check in with you next week if we need to. Okay, let's get going because we have a bunch to cover today, and just 1 hour left because we had... I'm so happy to see so many students here. This is actually awesome. But we have a bunch to do, so I'm going to just kind of launch quickly. I don't want to rush, so we may not get to absolutely everything that I intended today. I would rather cover it in detail and then move other stuff into the following classes. We have a bunch to go through, so don't worry. We have 12 weeks of this. The rest of the year will be just this on Saturdays. So, okay. Let's get started. So we talked about thinking in words. And actually, maybe I'll just give a little background about myself first, just really quickly before I do that. But so, for me, I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and historicals in the YA and also adult spaces. I'm mostly writing fantasy books nowadays, but I like that gives me a lot of ability to write in different tones and shades of that. You can do a fantasy that's basically a horror story. You can do a fantasy that's like an adventure. You can do a dramatic one. You can kind of do anything within that. So I really like the versatility of it. I'm coming from writing scripts and writing movies. I'm a repped and signed screenwriter for features, and I do a lot of uncredited rewrites for smaller horror thriller movies. So I'm mostly coming from horror thriller, but my main genres of choice and specialty are sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and I really like historicals, although I've never written a full historical book. I've written a fair number of historical scripts. Okay, so let's look at some things like this. So a page, like I said, is very variable. This is just some of the basic mechanics of this. Using 12-point font, a page of single-space text is about 500 words. In a published book, a page is about 250 words, but pages just really don't matter that much. So we want to be writing in 12-point-ish font in a readable font or whatever. But when writing a novel for the bootcamp, remember, you'll be writing about 2,000 words a day, at least on weekdays. If your book is longer, you might have to include weekends on there too. With the goal of writing a book that's between 50,000 and 90,000 words long. You can set a higher goal if you want to, but that would require just a crazy amount of words per day. If you think you can do it, then go for it. But you're going to be choosing a target length between 50 and 90,000 for the most part. So, unlike movie and TV and play scripts, books are not usually meant to be read in one sitting. Most books are going to take between 10 to 25 hours to read, and if you look at Audible, for instance, which is somebody reading the book at a careful, even, calm pace like this, that still takes about between 20 and 50 hours, depending on the length of the book. So chapters are a very practical way to break up a novel and to create this sense of structure to it. They're a great way to give the reader that kind of natural break. For the most part, a chapter is going to be, they're like often around 4,000 words in modern adult fiction, but there's many exceptions. YA is going to tend to be faster paced, shorter chapters. Adult will often be longer, but there's zero hard and fast rules about chapter length. Do you need to use chapters at all? No. Terry Pratchett books usually don't use chapters. If not, you probably still want to include some kind of breaks that just give you like a moment to stop reading, like the 3 asterisks or some other symbol like that is usually a common way of doing this. But there are not hard rules on chapters. Target market. So the market is sort of our way of saying this is the age group and the sort of area of population that this book is intended to interest. It doesn't mean that other groups won't read it ever. It just means they're less likely to, and you're sort of determining where the book will be shelved in a store or on a website. So what kind of art is going to be used on the cover also factors into this, and how the book is advertised. You imagine if it's a middle grade book, they're probably not going to advertise it in the Wall Street Journal, for instance. So in adult, that's going to some of the main things that we can use to determine this. One of the easiest things you can use is simply the main character's age. I know that doesn't sound like that important, or you may not have considered how important this is, but the general rule of thumb is that the assumption is that readers want to read about characters that are around their age because those people have the same sorts of problems, conflicts, and experiences that the readers themselves have. Especially when we look at younger ages, it tends to skew a little older, so kids are going to be usually reading characters that are a few years older than them. So you might imagine if a book is about a 17-year-old, then 15-year-olds might be who you're sort of mostly targeting with that. But that's not, again, a hard and fast rule. So adult is going to be characters that are 20 plus. The expectation is that the vocabulary or structure might be a little more complex, word counts are higher, and pace can be slower. There's also instances where it might have younger characters but still be an adult book. Like think of something like It by Stephen King, in which I know it is split half and half between the adults versions of these characters and the children version of the characters, but it starts out with the kids, and it's like it's just an adult story with younger heroes, so you can totally do that too. Pan's Labyrinth, another great example. It's like it's a movie with a middle grade age hero, but it's a very violent, very dark adult story. So something like the character age is not the only indicator of who the target market is, but it's a big one. New adult is not really a super solidly defined genre and does not really exist as much as some people want it to. This is a kind of weird nebulous market that features protagonists that are like, I don't know, 19 to 25 for the most part, and it might concern things like college stories or new job or like entering the workplace or things like that. Don't count on this genre. Like the definitions of it are changing all the time. Some publishers don't really believe it's a thing, so like your mileage will really vary when it comes to new adult. I think it's biggest in self-publish, and I think it's biggest in romance. Children's. So children's does not mean just picture books like Goodnight Moon. Know this. Everyone needs to know this. Children's means many things besides just little picture books. This is going to be YA, which the protagonists are going to be teenagers, and the book is written from an adolescent POV, not in retrospect as the adults. That's why it is not a YA book, because we're constantly flashing back and forth between the adult and children versions of those characters. YA is written from the point of view of adolescence, and with that sort of adolescent sensibility to it. It can involve just as much foul language, sex, and violence as an adult book. It might be a little less graphic. It might not be. You see F words in some YA books. You will see YA books about the Holocaust. Like, there's not an actual limit on what these books can be about. It just might probably, chances are it will be a little less graphic than an adult book would be. Middle grade is protagonist 9 to 13. Dark subjects are handled delicately, but absolutely can be. Like, you can have a middle grade book about very serious issues. They have them all the time, but they will be, from the perspective of the kid. So we don't want to overwhelm the kid with darkness and despair. And usually it helps to have a very hopeful kind of ending, even if the central themes of the book are relatively darker. Very few publishers will publish bleak, unrelenting middle grade books, if you know what I mean. So having this sort of hopefulness or lighter sensibility to it will really help you in middle grade. And we have chapter books, which is again for younger kids around 5 to 8. Some subjects are pretty much off the table for this unless you're a therapist and you're writing a book about how to cope with this terrible thing that happens to kids sometimes. Some subject there's just no publisher that's going to publish a chapter book about. So be mindful of what 5 to 8-year-olds are actually interested in and what they should be reading. And then we have picture books, which is kind of ages 1 to 5, and maybe a little bit older. But I don't really have any advice here. I think Amanda will have more advice for you. I've never read this, I read these as a child, but I don't really write these or know much about this market. There is a lot of skill that goes into this too, though. It's not as easy as a lot of people assume. So ask Amanda about that. Let's keep going. So that is going to be, I'm just going to give a little more on target markets, and then I will ask if we have any questions. So why do you think a lot of YA books have a love triangle? Why do you think a lot of middle grade books involve characters going to school or issues related to school? Why do so many adult books involve cheating and divorce? Well, the answers to these things are because any type of subject matter can be explored in different target markets, but you should take into account the interests that readership has and skew the presentation of that story accordingly. There are YA books about the Holocaust. There are adult books about people going on puppy love first dates. You can write about anything in any sort of viewpoint, but this should affect how you approach these things. And just imagine the kinds of experiences that those characters have and what might make it more accessible or interesting to that group. All right, any questions about target markets before we move on? So children's versus adult. You can feel free to either unmute and ask your question on voice or use the text chat.
What would be the genre in YA books? In YA books, young adult fiction books, what could be the subgenre? In a broader sense, what all things can you because what I am trying to write is there the character is going through his adolescence years, but there is a childhood story to it also. So it is it's not just it's not age based. That's what I'm saying. So what is your advice for me? How would it be youth and adolescence, and then he marries and a lot of stuff is there, but then it's a big thing, but still age doesn't matter there. But there is a lot of learning and the beats sort of thing, the initial beat, the story starts with something, and then the plot, the actual what happens in his life and what he learns from him, and then he moves on, and then how he it's a story of a memoir of that child, or I don't know how to explain it, but
so I can I can maybe give you some answers here. So the question might be, how old does the character end up by the end? Because if we're following somebody growing up and we follow them, through childhood, through adolescence, and then into adulthood, it's not YA, because YA has to just be from teenager point of view. If the character is going to be getting older than that and looking back at their life in retrospect, it's not YA. That's adult. That's adult fiction. So for sure, that's adult.
Okay. So in that case, my writing should be from the teenage, and then reflection, right? Reflecting back his old year.
You can do that. Yeah, well, there's not a right or wrong way to do it. You can. There's examples of any different style of telling this kind of story. There's many different versions of this, but some of the most common versions are going to be adult reflecting on their life as they grow up and as they approach their current age. If it's going to be a YA book, though, that we can't do any of that reflecting kind of thing. It has to be just in the moment. It has to be from the perspective of teenagers and not from the perspective of adults or small children. The genre you're probably looking at is just called contemporary. And that's going to be sort of the broader genre we use to refer to stories. In movies, we probably call this drama. And contemporary books are like realistic modern day fiction. Does it sound like that's the sort of thing you're working on?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, thank you for that.
Sure. So yeah, my guess is for you contemporary adult.
Yeah, I will do more research on it. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so any other questions on target markets, children's versus adults, YA middle grade, chapter picture versus adult, new adult, any of these things?
Yes, I do. On the part of the chapter for the kids between 1 to 5, are you like referring to the Berenstein Bears?
Yeah.
Like,
Berenstein
okay.
Bears, Dr. Seuss, that's picture books.
Okay, all right.
And then
I
chapter
mean, it
books
also
would be a
has.
little older. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, because I mean, I know they also have verbiage, talking about the issue.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you don't pick up your room. So what age is that?
So picture books have text in them usually. It's not just pictures. There's usually like a couple sentences per page. Think of like The Very Hungry Caterpillar, or like the Goodnight Moon, or these things that they do have text too. But usually they're intended to be read to the child. Not the child isn't always going to be reading the text themselves.
Reading it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that.
Sure. And then next up is going to be chapter books, and that's like they're reading on their own. That's usually going to be stuff that they're reading for school to begin with, but then branching out, think of like your Nancy Drew, like that sort of, I guess that would be almost like proto-YA, but that's like books that are shorter than adult books and with usually simpler language, but the kids are reading these themselves.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's look at commercial fiction. So that's what the differences between the sort of, these are like the different modes that we're writing in here. So commercial fiction is the specialty of this class, and this is the focus of this class. My specialty is fantasy, sci-fi, horror, and historicals in this category. So let's look at the definition of commercial fiction. This has broad appeal and the potential to sell lots of copies. In other words, commercial fiction is written in a way of style and story that's accessible and likely to be enjoyed by the average reader. So you don't need to have a college degree or a very special education or anything like that to understand and enjoy these books. You don't have to necessarily have that for anything, but like this is just part of the definition, the core definition of commercial. These often are going to fit into really clear-cut subgenres like mystery, horror, romance, fantasy, sci-fi, and so you have to know what the expectations are and the things that the readers will want from those different genres if you are writing these things. If we're not writing commercial, you might be writing literary, they tend to be more, quote, sophisticated. Their intention might be to advance the medium, to make some kind of change in the world or culture, or to simply stun readers with really exquisite, beautiful, amazing prose. Some examples of these authors might be David Foster Wallace, Barbara Kingsolver, Cormac McCarthy. They're writing books that are going to win the Nobel Prize or the Pulitzer, or the words themselves are a big part of the appeal, perhaps even the main appeal. So the artistry and the craft of the language takes a lot of precedence in literary fiction over top of genre thrills, as we might call them. So the things that the reader's coming there for, just because it says romance or because it says horror on the box or on the book, then you don't have to worry about that as much in literary. Literary fiction doesn't really have to fit into one of these subgenres, like a movie genre. Commercial fiction are sort of like movies. They're like movie genres. But literary fiction are more like independent art house movies, I guess you might think of it. I think of things like, let's look at The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, which is about an adult man I guess it's set in the 90s or early 2000s, sort of reflecting on him and his friends and family growing up living next door to this house full of 3 girls that they were kind of like all really attracted to and interested in, and they sort of just have various friendships with them over the course of time. And over the book, all the girls commit suicide. It's not a huge spoiler. It's in the beginning. It's like the basis of the book. And he's sort of trying to reflect on his life and figure out what drove them to that or why that happened, and trying to piece together various parts of, this family's life and how they ended up that way. Is it a mystery, though? Not really. There's not really a lot of urgency. It's sort of, in the movie, it sort of feels like he's making a documentary about it, which kind of makes sense, but he's not really. There's not really a character goal besides he wants to understand this family that lived across from him as a kid. And it's a fantastic, incredible book. It doesn't have to have a genre, like a really clear commercial genre to it, if the craft of the writing is amazing, if the telling of the story is really compelling. So, like, books can be interesting in a lot of different ways. But this class is, again, going to specialize in and focus on these commercial genres because literary is really hard to kind of teach unless you are focusing the whole class on that and really looking at the mechanics of beautiful prose and, like, theme and subtext and all this kind of stuff. So we're really going to look at commercial fiction in the class. Literary is going to be slower paced with more advanced vocabulary, more poetic language, longer and more complex sentences. They might have experimental structures, very character-driven instead of plot-driven narratives, complex themes, really original or intellectual ideas, or a lot of the time not very conventional endings. So you can absolutely write that, but most of the instruction here is going to look at commercial, and this kind of in-between point we call upmarket, which we mentioned a little bit earlier today, which is kind of like genre commercial fiction with a more literary voice to it, or with a more sort of literary heft to the ideas behind it, or something along those lines. So here's some examples here of how you can approach the same subject matter or the same genre in these different sort of modes or like lenses, you might say. So we have post-apocalyptic or dystopian, right? We have a literary example of this in The Road, which was like, Pulitzer Prize winning achievement of a book. Then we have upmarket, which is going to be something like The Handmaid's Tale, which Margaret Atwood does write. Upmarket sci-fi for the most part. So this is speculative sci-fi that has that very kind of advanced, sophisticated voice to it, but really offers some of these more genre thrills in some of her stuff too. Just look at the Oryx and Crake series. Or how about Hunger Games, which is like the commercial version of this, where we have the kind of most accessible, kind of easiest to read, and most thrilling version of this that focuses on delivering the genre thrills at kind of the heart of what we're doing here. Here's more examples. How about Western? On the literary end, we have The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, by Ron Hansen, which is an 800-page, incredible it's a novel but based on true stories, but you have to kind of like piece together fictional interludes between some of these things because no one was there to record exactly how these scenes went more than 100 years ago. So super dense. It's about themes of like destiny and heroism and like what makes a man important and what makes America tick and all these things like that. And then we have an upmarket Western, something like A Congregation of Jackals by S. Craig Zahler, which are really basic. Zahler books are kind of like horror Western, weird horror Westerns, essentially, but written in this very literary voice with super advanced vocabulary and very interesting sort of use of language all throughout. And then we have commercial over here. Oh, go ahead. Do you have a
Connor,
question?
can I slow you down for 1 second? Yeah.
Sure.
So, did you say commercial is separate from upmarket? So so literary is, you were clear about that. Upmarket also has brilliant prose, and then commercial is more dumbed down for the masses. I know that's a horrible way of saying it, but it's like commercial is
for the masses.
Accessible.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, I love it. I mean, Harry Potter was so easy to read and it was just enjoyable, but it's commercial because it's so accessible.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing, doesn't mean that it's better or worse, but so what, can you tell me what difference between upmarket and literary is again? I just missed that. And
that's okay. I didn't have a full slide for it. So this is sort of it's like in between commercial and literary. So
okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
So like in this case, Congregation of Jackals is like a really pulpy genre-y Western, but it's written in this very literary way. So it might be a story that does fulfill all the sort of basic promises you would expect to see in a commercial book, but maybe the way that it's told is sort of more sophisticated. Usually that's where we're going to kind of see these things fall.
Got it. So I would say, so would you say Golden Compass is upmarket? That was beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some, not every part, but some of it was just, wow.
Yeah.
Some of it was really beautiful. Okay.
So I think by most definitions, Golden Compass series is upmarket YA fantasy.
That makes sense.
Right. But there's not a lot of that. There's not a ton of upmarket YA fantasy, which is kind of cool. But you see the distinction comes in like the voice, the words that are used to tell the story. That's usually what's going to make something upmarket. But there's not like a super strong guideline on what is upmarket and what's not. Okay, so, and then we have over here fantasy, so we have everything from literary fantasy, like Nobel Prize winning The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. We have upmarket fantasy, which would be something like Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and then on the right, like, you guys can just see the difference in the covers here, right? Excuse me. So, the commercial covers are going to be mostly putting the genre thrills at the front and center. Like, if this is going to be a commercial fantasy book, there's going to be a dragon on the cover, or, like, a guy with a big sword, or, like, kind of an elf girl that's front and center with, like, an axe in her hand and a spell book in the other, or something like that. We're just going to put those genre thrills up at the front. And then we have, the literary cover. It tells you there's sort of going to be a lot kind of literally here, and so to speak, buried under the surface. It might give you an image that doesn't really feel like it's evoking swords clashing off of dragon scales, but it does sort of say this is going to be kind of enchanting and academic perhaps, and more about the language and words themselves. This is, it has a Nobel Prize sticker right there on the cover. Okay, so does everybody kind of understand this distinction between upmarket literary and commercial? And you get that none of these things mean that anything's good or bad. There's terrible literary fiction. There's really incredible commercial fiction. None of these things are a judgment on the value or the quality of the text. This makes sense to everybody? Okay, cool. Let's keep going. So, genres. Some genres have stricter rules than others. Usually there's not really a definitive checklist of every single thing that needs to be in a certain genre. You get this through your experience reading and writing. And this is why reading is so essentially important. I think a few folks mentioned, I don't really read a lot of books. You must read a lot of books to write good books. So start reading. And we have some great links to some novelettes to choose from at the end of today if you're interested in my genres, which are sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. I have one of each to read. A great short that will take you like 30 minutes. So you've got plenty of things to choose from. So you got to read to understand genres. It's a combination of expectations, tropes, and general sort of indefinable vibes that a story exudes that is going to determine sort of where is it shelved in a store, who are the kind of people that are going to be interested in this, and what kind of promises am I saying I'm going to fulfill. So let's think of some of the expectations of these different genres. What do you think the audience of this genre would like to see or need to see in that book before they would be satisfied? And I want to start on contemporary just because this is not really one of my genres that I know a ton about, but I think we might ask just what makes a contemporary book, right? Let's think of some examples. Like this exists in every age group by far. This is your Judy Blume in middle grade, your Faults in Our Stars in YA, or your Eat, Pray, Love in adult, right? This is realistic modern day stories. Can you guys think of some things that make a contemporary book, or what are people looking for in a contemporary book? Marcus says a modern world that we recognize. Yes, that is key to this. Go ahead. I heard somebody else.
Yeah, like he said, like a world that's contemporary to ours, like that looks like ours in a modern realistic sense.
Yep, absolutely. It may not be the place that our readers are familiar with in the worlds, but it is going to be a place in them. Like think of travel writing, for instance. A lot of the appeal of travel-based stories is that you will in fact get to see a place in the modern contemporary world that we haven't seen before. So it doesn't have to be the arena within the world doesn't have to be super specific or familiar to us, but it does have to take place relatively modern day. Like you might say in the last 10 years is going to be contemporary. Nobody's going to call it a historical book if it takes place in 1999 probably, but and I realize that was 20 years ago, but this is sort of like recent past, kind of like modern day. Go ahead.
I was just trying, before you did this, I was just trying to define the genre of Ramona and of Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume. Mm-hmm. And I wrote kids drama right. before you did this. So contemporary is kind of like, one of the expectations might be drama.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it could be comedy, but I would say more drama.
Yeah. In movies, we call this either drama, comedy, or dramedy. And contemporary, it sort of is going to be stories that could only happen to real people in real settings. The books don't really fall into other categories. They take place in the same time period that the reader is living in, the present. So it's sort of weird to think of stuff written in the past as contemporary, maybe because the genre didn't really the definition didn't really exist until the relative recent past. So you might see something like, I don't know, think of Sherlock Holmes is written in the present day for when it came out, right? I know it's a mystery, but you get the idea. Or like, I don't know, think of something like a Jane Austen book. Are they contemporary? Well, no, not anymore. Nowadays, they sort of are like historical romance, but at the time they weren't historical. So some contemporary books might contain shades of another genre. Think of something like Holes by Louis Sachar, which is a very famous book, YA contemporary book that has like a bit of a mystery element to it. So there might be sort of like bits and pieces of other genres in these, but contemporary essentially is like realistic modern day drama or comedic stories. Anyone have any questions about, I'm not an expert on this one, but does anyone have any questions on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like the really successful contemporary have kind of speak to something important that's happening in the world, or some kind of controversial topic, or some, you know, current event, something. They're they spark conversation, right?
Yeah.
This is why they get, you know, inspire book clubs and stuff like that, and reading circles or whatever.
Yeah. Contemporary has a unique ability, or maybe not unique, but it has a very strong ability to engage with things that are happening right now, or they're about sort of today, in ways that other genres can't always be. You can sometimes do that too, but books like The Hate You Give, which is another really popular YA contemporary, was about like being a kid in the age of, you know, protests and police accountability and shootings and things like that. So things that matter to people now, and they do have a lot of ability to create those conversations, and that to, you know, have some kind of commentary or something to say about the world as it is. Okay, let's keep going. So I won't have a full slide on this because just there's a bunch to go through and we have way more to do. But let's throw out some things that we expect to see in each of these genres. So in horror, especially horror books, we don't need a lot of blood and gore. So blood and gore is not an essential part of it. Like it's not. It can absolutely be in the story much more than any other genre, except for maybe grimdark fantasy, which is sometimes even gorier than horror. But like you can see, horror will include danger, high stakes, life and death stakes, maybe elements of magic or monsters or impossible things that can't exist in our world, or they might be more realistic if they are just focusing on scaring the reader as much as possible. So we could do a serial killer story that was horror, right? Even though there's nothing magical or impossible in that, as long as it comes down to the presentation of it. So you can write a horror story about a serial killer, or a crime story about a serial killer, or a dramatic story about a serial killer, and each of those will focus on different things, right? We're going to really play up the scariness of the murder sequences in the horror. We want the reader to feel like they are the victim, and their spine is being chilled by the horrible events they're imagining happening to these characters, or the fear that they're feeling. Whereas a crime story might be sort of more about the facts of the case, and how were they caught, and what did the police do, and what procedures did they use to catch the killer. What else do we want to see in horror stories?
I'm here. So I think what a big thing that we expect from
I
horror
feel like
films
he
is
listed all of it.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry? I felt like he listed all of it.
There was a bunch of it, sure. I think maybe you weren't able to hear. There was somebody else. Sorry, go ahead. Who was in the middle of speaking?
Me.
Oh, go ahead,
Mark. Am I here?
Yeah, go ahead. I hear you.
Okay. So actually, this I know from film theory, right, where we kind of have the idea that horror is not necessarily predicated on fear, at least from a strictly genre theory lens, because you can point to things like detective, crime, thriller, and these kind of like predicate themselves on fear, but like the various subgenres within horror, what unites them is usually some sort of element of what's the word I'm looking for? Damn it, I forgot. I literally just had it on the time. It was the taboo, right? Which is like kind of something you can see like horror operating on throughout the various eras of history. So like I think something with like horror, I literally what I go for horror for, and what I expect out of horror is that one really transgressive thing, item, idea, something that's like I'm not going to see out of violence that's going to be typicated in, you know, maybe like a noir, right? Which is like kind of gives itself the lens for moral complication, and I know it's going to explore the character out of that. But like horror, you're going for not necessarily something to be explored, but something to be transgressed. Literally, you see it, and you know something is just not right, is just not wrong, and that inspires your imagination that way.
Yeah, pushing the boundaries. So we want horror stories that kind of push the boundaries of what is taboo, what is acceptable, and maybe explore ideas of these darker elements of society or culture that we don't see brought into the light very often. Anything else we'd like to see with these? The unknown, says Javon. Yes, exactly. That's a big part of this horror. Will draw a lot of fear from the unknown. We're gonna have to move kind of quick through this just because I don't want to rush through everything. I guess I won't really be able to get much into prose today, but that's all right. We'll look more at that next week. So let me actually just skip ahead a few slides to see what else that I wanted to get to. Yeah, the rest was prose and then premise. We'll talk just a little bit about premise at the end. We'll save prose for next week. Okay. So I'm going to go quickly through these, and maybe just in your own mind you can be thinking, what do I want to see out of these stories, and what do I expect to see? So I'm going to just close to discussion just for the purposes of time for the rest of this section here. So fantasy, we want to see things that are impossible or that can never happen in the world. If something could become possible at some point, it's probably sci-fi, not fantasy. We want to see magic, monsters, spells, alternate worlds. We want to see, stuff that can never possibly happen in our reality. Magical realism is sort of a subgenre of this, in which maybe magic is treated as normal or boring, or characters don't really remark upon it. I remember reading a book growing up called The Minotaur Takes a Cigarette Break, which was about a minotaur that was like a short order cook, and nobody really thought it was weird that he was a minotaur. They all sort of treated him just like a normal guy. And so that's a sort of fun little... Those are popular nowadays, actually. Magical realism is like an interesting version of this, but you still have that element of thing that is not possible in our world. There's a lot of tropes that are also associated with fantasy. A lot of the famous versions of this take place in secondary worlds, which are worlds that are not Earth. They are constructed entirely from, myth and legend or the author's imagination, and often have a predilection towards medieval settings, probably due to Tolkien, but there's a ton of variety, and there's no reason that these have to be just knights and castles. There's a lot of things that are fantasy that don't involve knights and castles at all. Romance. So this is, again, not my genre, so I looked up some of the things that really make romance, and I realized, first of all, one, this is the top-selling genre. This is by far the thing that is read most of anything. It has the strictest rules I'm also aware of, so I thought I'd look them up and paste a couple suggestions from, or not suggestions, requirements for something to be considered romance from the Romance Writers Association. The first is a central love story. The main plot will center around individuals of any gender falling in love and struggling to make their relationship work. So a writer can include as many subplots as they want, as long as that love story is at the heart of the book. You can have a romantic subplot in a different genre, but if the romantic connection and relationship between those people and the question of is this going to work or not is not at the heart of it, it's probably not capital R romance. An emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. You probably weren't thinking this was a requirement too, but it actually is. In romance, the lovers who risk and struggle for each other and their relationship are rewarded with emotional justice, as they say, and unconditional love, meaning they have what is called a happily ever after ending. There's different variations of that, which the romance community is like obsessed with, these little acronyms like HFN, which means happily for now. And there's like maybe a little room for that in mainstream romance, but sad endings are really not part of the genre as, capital R romance is defined. They can have any sort of tone or style, be set in any place and time, and have any level of sort of, sensuality to them, from erotic on the far end of the spectrum to really chaste and sweet on the other end. But these are the sort of things that are really required to make a romance book. I don't really write these, so I will not be the best person to ask about that. We have mystery, which is going to be guided by a sort of central question that the characters are trying to resolve, often related to a crime or a murder of some kind that's been committed, but not always. We have thrillers, which are actually a really broad genre in books, because thriller can encompass everything from, like, espionage books, like James Bond books are considered thrillers. Psychological thrillers are also in this category, too, so something that might feel a little more like a horror story. So a lot of mysteries that have, or a lot of thrillers have large elements of mystery, too, so something like The Girl on the Train or Gone Girl are like mysteries with a lot of thriller elements. So there's kind of a lot of things that thriller can be in the book world. The distinction from horror is that thriller is going to be more about that suspense and those mysteries and those questions rather than the shock and disgust, but there might be a little bit of both. Like, there's a lot of crossover between horror and thriller. What else? Action adventure. I think we all have some sense of what this is. And this is going to be everything from your pulp novels to, military action or things like that. I think these are going to often involve larger-than-life heroes, because if the heroes are not much larger than life, it's unlikely that they will survive through a series of action scenarios. If we're getting into really realistic military fiction, for instance, that might just be contemporary/military, which is its own kind of thing. But action adventure is going to be like kind of exaggerated movie-ish. Imagine like your Indiana Joneses, Alan Quatermain, all of these kind of big characters that, superhero stories, stuff like that is going to fit into action adventure. And then we have sci-fi, which I taught a whole course on sci-fi, but mostly revolving around alternate worlds or societies often in the future, but not always in the future, that are going to be centered around some speculative elements of technology that will be at the heart of the story. So these are like it's like a type of setting that the story could take place in, and the technology that story focuses on will be used in whatever the genre throws of the specific subgenre you're in. So sci-fi horror would probably be, we're going to use a sci-fi element, like let's say an alien, as the horror element too. Or you can see how you can just make sci-fi / anything work, as long as that technology is kind of at the heart of how that story is functioning, or at least it's like the arena that story takes place in. Okay, so there's a bunch of different genres here, and we have to kind of just read a lot of each of the things that we like in order to get a good sense of what makes those things tick and what the readers want to see. And let me skip this prose stuff for now, and we'll go right into premise. And so genres are how we're going to tell what we want to read, basically, because some people have some genres that they only read and some genres they'll never read. So this is determining what the reader is going to pick up at the end of the day. The other big thing is the premise. And the premise is sort of just the core concept of the story. And this should be interesting and relatable to us on a kind of primal level to the greatest number of people possible, regardless of time period or culture. But you can see how stories that are more specific can sometimes be more relatable. So you shouldn't feel limited by the idea that your story takes place in a niche or a subculture or something like that. That doesn't necessarily mean that the greatest number of people won't be interested or invested in it. So we're always going to be considering how compelling is that core concept. Like, books don't have to be about, not every book has to be Harry Potter or Hunger Games, right? We don't always have to have an evil villain that we're trying to defeat with missions that we're going on and like that really strong tangible backbone of like an action adventure fantasy story. We can have a concept of a book, especially in literary, that's like a couple is going through a divorce, and that can kind of be it. Like sometimes in literary especially, most of the book takes place in their minds, like with them just thinking about stuff. So that isn't going to be a very high concept core compelling premise though, probably. So you can see why a hooky premise is going to usually be a marketing tool that you're going to use to get people to read the book or to get people interested in buying the book. If you can really succinctly sum up what your book is or what it's about, or it's this thing meets that thing, that just makes it easier for someone to get into and to understand what they're potentially reading or paying for. We might also ask questions like, is the core concept immediately apparent? Does the script stray away from or does the manuscript stray away from that core concept? Does it explore that premise to its full potential? These are all questions that will come up in the actual reading and evaluation of the manuscript itself. But it's helpful if your core concept can be discerned and concisely summarized in one single sentence. We're not going to work on loglines today, but if you are coming from our screenwriting classes, we talk a ton about loglines. So this is more something for next week, but start to maybe think, if you know what loglines are and how do they work, just what would my one sentence summation of the book be? And this could be something pretty simple, even in just like the most essential form of it. So for instance, I wrote a book a year ago. This 2 books ago I wrote this. It was a YA sci-fi book about a teenager in a sort of near future cyberpunk Alaska, and he starts a wildlife rehabilitation center for injured robots. And see how that's just like one sentence. It tells you what the main character is doing, what is the world that we're in, what is the conflict, and why would I read this? Why would I tune in? Oh, well, I mean, a wildlife rehabilitation center for robots is just kind of like at the heart of that premise. It's like, wouldn't I like to see that? Or wouldn't I like to see a character set that up or go through the challenges of maintaining that? You're just trying to grab someone's attention with the basics of the premise. It doesn't always have to be that. I mean, you can just say your premise is a couple goes through a divorce, but it's probably going to not hook people as much as something like teenager sets up wildlife rehab for injured mechs. Not to say that my premise is going to lead to a better book. That was a very flawed book when I came out with it. But you can see how at least the premise is something that you're going to use to get readers, and you're going to use to interest people, and you're going to try to query with this premise front and center, because this is how a literary agent is going to decide, what am I going to read, who am I going to represent? So don't worry way too much about loglines now, but just start thinking, what is the premise of my book? Like, how can I actually express this in just a sentence or two? If it takes more than a few sentences to express, it's probably too complicated of a story. We're also going to be looking a bit at originality. Not every book has to be the most original thing ever, and you're not being like graded too harshly on this. I would rather that you write a book than write the most original book. I'd rather you write a book than not write one at all, because you can't think of an original idea. It's important just to exercise this muscle memory and to like build these skills by writing books, whether they're original or not, or whether they're good or not, because they probably won't be too much of either one of those to begin with. But that's okay. You're doing this because this is like going to the gym. These boot camps are like lifting weights. You're trying not to unearth some buried nugget of gold that's going to change your life. You're trying to write book after book after book because you're trying to improve and trying to become a writer. You're not trying to have written one book. You're trying to become a writer. So originality, it will draw people in a lot of the time. We don't like cliches as much. I mean, we don't want to see established conventions, and or like ideally you're adding something new to the genre, or you're giving us, I don't know, maybe it's at least set in a different location or with a different main point of view than we've seen before. Something that just mixes this up a little bit. And you can just change up a couple things about the book. Maybe change the age and gender of the main character. Maybe change the, you know, the place that the story takes place in. Something like that will just help make this feel fresher. So it just shouldn't feel exactly like something that already exists, and the description of your book should not just sound like a description of the genre. If it's like a detective gets a case to catch a serial killer, and then he has to go catch the serial killer before the killer kills more people, that just sounds like you're describing crime serial killer thrillers. So we want to just feel specific. We're looking for specificity. So much of what we're evaluating in our the stories that we read and write. So I'm going to go into the assignments for next time, and we're going to give you some options for novelettes to read in preparation for next class. So let's look at this paragraph assignment first. If you can't write a good paragraph, you're not going to write thousands of good paragraphs. You're not going to write a good page. If you can't write a good page, you're not going to write 100 good pages. So for next week, your job is to write one paragraph, any fictional event, a description. It can be a description of a room. It can follow a character completing an action. It can be literally anything you want. It doesn't have to be self-contained. Like, it doesn't all have to explain itself as you go. It can kind of feel like it's from the middle of a book. But I encourage you to write this fresh rather than taking it from something you've written before, because I want to see a snapshot of where is everybody at right now. What are the strengths and weaknesses in your writing? Maybe I can give you a couple pointers just based on what you turn in then. It's not graded too harshly. This is just to get you used to the idea of sharing stuff early and at all stages. So write a paragraph and turn it in next week, and we're going to look at them in class. You can either read it out loud if you want to, or you could have somebody else read it out loud, however you want to do it. But just do your best, and it's okay if it's not very good. Just give yourself permission to not be very good at this, and just to do, quote, bad work, whatever bad work even is. Like, you should just accept that not everything you write is going to be perfect, and just allow yourself to make mistakes or to write stuff that needs work or write stuff that needs improvement. And just laugh at it and say, hey, yeah, no, that does need work. That does need improvement. It's like someone else wrote it. You know, that's how you can approach the feedback stage. And giving and receiving feedback elegantly are just a lot of the skills that we try to emphasize here at Script Camp. So be ready to start practicing receiving notes elegantly and gracefully and without, you know, arguing with everyone giving you notes or these things like that. Just say, thank you for your time. I'll think about that. And that's all you really need to have in mind there. So write a new paragraph for next week. Any questions about this? Okay, no questions. Just do your best. Here's an example. I had a couple prose examples that I wanted to look at today. I'll just bring this up to show you. This is something you could turn in something like this. This is just the description of a bathroom from Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides, who I mentioned earlier. Is there any place as comforting as an old institutional pre-war bathroom? The basement bathroom at Baker and Ingalls was done up like a box at the opera. Edwardian lighting fixtures gleamed overhead. The sinks were deep white bowls set in blue slate. When you bent to wash your face, you saw tiny cracks in the porcelain as in a Ming vase. Gold chains held the drain stoppers in place. Beneath the taps, drippings had worn the porcelain thin in green stripes. Simple as that. You can just turn that in. A description of something, a person doing something, a description of a character, something like that. We're looking to turn that in for next week. 4 to 8 sentences. What else? Okay, so you're going to be brainstorming for your book and for your premise. And if you came in with an idea of what you wanted to write, maybe I would recommend, if it's not fitting in the guidelines of the class, like you really want to write a biography a few people mentioned or something like that, maybe consider trying a practice book for the purposes of the course, just so you can start to build those skills and work on the essentials of writing before you start to take on those really important projects that mean a lot to you. It's not that you shouldn't care about this, it's not that you're throwing it away, but just pick something that's newer and fresher that you get excited about that you can write in, 2 months. So your goal for next time is to read a novelette from the list that I'm about to give you, or you can begin a novel or novella of your choice, but you got to be reading something. And then I already told you about the paragraph thing. Okay, shall we look at the choices for novelettes to read? And I have links to each of these as well. So I have a fantasy, a horror, and a sci-fi, because those are the things I like the most. If you don't like any of those genres, you can find your own thing. But let's look at the examples here. We have For He Can Creep by Siobhan Carroll. This is a Hugo-winning novelette from last year. It's one of my favorite things I've ever read. It's a dark yet whimsical fantasy about a talking cat named Joffrey who fights demons and guards an insane asylum from demons in the mid-1700s. There's a poet who's Joffrey's human. He considers him his owner, more or less. And he's confined to an insane asylum where Satan schemes to end the world. So, it sounds like a lot going on there, but it's like a 20-30 minute read. Hilariously done, fantastic voice. Just check it out. It's awesome if you like fantasy, before he can creep. Let's look at Suffer Little Children by Robert Sherman. This is a horror, gothic cosmic horror story about a school teacher, and I think it's set in the 1930s, whose new student has a sinister secret. I won't tell you more than that. It's, again, 20-30 minute read, and prose is excellent. Pacing is excellent. I love how this one unfolds, and a bizarre... when it says cosmic horror, you can expect a crazy ending, so it has a crazy ending. Check that out if you're into horror. And then last we have Dislocation Space by Garth Nix. This one's awesome too. Adult sci-fi about a female sniper in a Soviet labor camp who's been offered her freedom if she can complete a strange mission exploring a crack between dimensions that she will have to physically squeeze through. And no one can get through it, so they try to hire her to get through it. That one's really cool too. So we have links for all those in the slideshow, and then I can also just link those in the chat right here for everyone who has arrived. I want to leave a little time just here at the ending for questions as we wrap things up for today. I want to make sure everyone understands what to do for next week and understands what the program is. And let's just take any last remaining questions now as I link these stories in our chats. Javon had a question. Is it just one paragraph, no word count requirement? Yeah, just one paragraph. There's no word count requirement on the paragraph. Just like 4 to 8 sentences should be totally fine. Let's open it to all questions about anything we talked about today for our last 5-10 minutes.
Sure. I just also wanted to remind everyone, if you're interested in, joining the 12-week boot camp, haven't signed up yet, you can just click yes poll, and you can get immediate access to the boot camp channels.
Thank you, Nacho. Again, that is if you mouse over Classroom and click that small white word bubble that says Open Chat, then you will see just scroll up a little bit, and you will find a bunch of blue numbers to click on. If you click the number 1, that means you intend to sign up for the class. You'll get instant access to all of our chat channels that pertain to the class. Thanks, Nacho. Questions from anyone on anything we've talked about today?
Oh, I just wanted to say, when you're describing the first book, that sentence hit hard.
Which one? This novelette here?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, if that sounds intriguing to you, I highly recommend it. Super quick read, really evocative, really interesting. I loved it, and it seems like there might be more in the series at some point, which she has hinted at. But I really like her work. She has a bunch of other great sort of dark fantasy horror stuff you should check out too. Other questions about anything we talked about today, or about the course, about WordCamp or ScriptCamp? Do you guys know what you want to read for next time? Do you guys want to pick one of these, or do you have something on your own that you want to tell us you're going to be reading that we can look forward to hearing about?
I was wondering, so you're going over prose and stuff in the course, right?
Yeah, next week.
Oh, cool. All right, thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Any questions, comments, things you'd like to see in the class?
You said, what was the requirement for next time? I guess how much are we? I don't know if you said we were supposed to read a certain amount or do a certain amount of.
So you can write a paragraph to turn in. Oh yeah, I'll leave this up. Just be thinking about what your book is going to be, and I say either read one of these novelettes that I linked. You can read them all in one sitting, so I think it's very doable. Or if you want to start reading something longer, then just get going on that and be ready to tell us about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Let's see. Check the chat here. Connor, did I shave? Yes, I did. Thank you, Javon. Oh, wait, maybe you're referring to the haircut. I did get a haircut, too. I haven't shaved in a bit. But the haircut, that's new. Okay, if there's no more questions, Nacho, anything else we want to tell people about? Besides Lab today, we have Lab from 4 to 6 if you have more questions or up to 5 pages of something that you might want to work on. Anything else we want to leave people with?
Yeah, just so for anyone who's not familiar, so you can get limited membership, and you have access to all of the, Script Camp, Word Camp, any other future camps that we're going to be adding. So you can have access to a weekly writers lab every Saturday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, where Connor, helps you work through any issues that you're having with your project, and just drop by. Maybe you can show them the membership channel.
Sure.
Or yeah. But basically, all you need to do really is just, if you're interested, you can hit the yes button in the poll, the number 1 button, and then get immediate access, and then we can help you sign up later on.
Thank you, Nacho. Yep, so the unlimited membership comes with a 2-week free trial. So if you want to just come to the next 2 classes, and then if you decide you don't like it, there's no, you don't have to pay anything. But we hope to see you here for the next class, and for perhaps our many other classes in Script Camp too, if you're interested in those types of writing. But hope to see everyone here next week at least with your paragraph and either a novelette or your new thing that you want to read that you are ready to tell us a little bit about. I think that'll wrap us up for today, unless anyone else has anything that they'd like to know. I'll see you guys at Lab at 4 o'clock. And even if you just sign up today, you can still attend that lab if you have more questions or up to 5 pages to work on. Okay, that's going to be all for today. Next week we'll do prose and more on premise and log lines, and we will start to figure out how to shape and mold what you have of your book so far into a more clear and coherent package that will help you go all the way to the end of your first draft. Thanks so much for coming, folks. We will hope to see more of you soon, and look forward to having you all in WordCamp. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll talk to you later.